act silly is the power of the people's vote. And I think the people should use it to vote for... Say it again! Let me hear it one more time!
Hi there. In this last none of the above video, I want to try to tie together everything that I've said in the previous videos, and in doing so, make the case one final time for why I think that voting none of the above in the next election will be the best possible use of your vote. And so the basic underlying premise is that we as a culture, as a civilization, society, whatever, are in deep trouble, and that wherever you look, there are crises either already in full bloom or brewing away. Just to list a few, I mean, most obviously front and center at the moment is the environmental crisis, which, you know, is an existential threat to us all, debasing the very substrate on which we all depend. But there are plenty of others that line up alongside that. There's financial crises. There's the increase in extreme political parties and polarization in society at large. There's the continued rise in inequality, which then leads to things like depression and suicide and drug addiction and homelessness and loneliness. You know, all of these things are symptoms of a very deep malaise that lies at the very heart of our culture. And so in response to that, we need to find completely different ways of doing things. And there are plenty of people out there coming up with innovative, imaginative, creative solutions in light of new understandings about things. And so, you know, solutions to problems like food and energy production in sustainable ways, there are solutions out there already. To regenerate the soil around the globe, there are solutions out there already. You know, for many of the problems, biodegradable plastics, there are plenty of solutions out there which are ready for trial, you know, ready to be experimented with. But everybody finds themselves kind of stuck because the way we do things at the moment is through our centralized political systems. And so it seems to me that a very important first step in getting unstuck is to disavow ourselves of the notion that this is the best way of doing things. Reclaiming sovereignty and the notion of individual and collective voluntary responsibility. That's really what none of the above is about. Two main strands to this. Number one, recognizing the fact that our current political and choice-making systems are incapable, fundamentally incapable of sorting out the mess that lies in front of us. And secondly, that none of the above could be a umbrella under which many, many, many different people can stand. And I mean, I've unpacked both of these things in detail in preceding videos, but I'm just going to briefly go over each of these two things one more time in this one. And so first of all, it's important to take responsibility for understanding that governmental systems are incapable of sorting out this mess. And this is basically because of the idea of the complex and the complicated that I went into in video 3, I think it was. In that our systems of organization and governance are complicated, but the natural world with which they deal, with which they interact, are complex, and these two things are fundamentally incompatible. And so, you know, our complicated systems have buried us under a pile of rules and regulations and league tables and spreadsheets and laws and blah, 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 that nobody can possibly hold in their head and understand. And the spirit of finding ways in which we can peacefully and sensibly collaborate with each other on a large scale has been buried under a massive pile of complicatedness. The other problem is as well that the complicated is easily hacked and is therefore susceptible to corruption, which is why we have a situation now where our politics is entirely driven by money. Candidates are selected by money. Elections are decided by money, particularly in America, but I mean, it's the same everywhere. And this forces politicians into a position where they are forced to be duplicitous and lie. I mean, they lie about their expenses, they lie about their affairs, they lie about their business interests, they lie to cover up their failures, they lie to take us to war. You know, they simply can't be trusted. And even good people who get into the senior levels of politics are so beholden to the various interests that put them there that they can't be themselves. I made this point regarding Theresa May, that, the only times she was actually a human being was at the very beginning and the very end of her premiership. All the time in between, she was a complete automaton, a complete robot. And it's also worth remembering that even if their intentions were good and honourable and they genuinely wished to change things for the better, most of these people are simply not qualified or experienced to be able to do so. As I pointed out in a previous video, when was the last time a farmer was the head of the agriculture department or a teacher the head of the education department? And so, these people are all lawyers and economists and accountants and so on. And even if they wanted to, they simply don't have the know-how, the vision, the experience, the expertise to be able to manage these things. And the final point I want to make on this in this section is the adversarial modality of the decision-making process. And so under our current political paradigm, the party in power or the group in power, whatever it might be, formulates a policy. There may be some argument and hashing out and refining of that policy, and then it gets voted on, right? Rather than, so it's a very, very top-down driven decision-making process, as opposed to getting a group of people together, deciding on, right, what do we actually want to achieve here? What does each group of people, what are their particular interests in this? What fundamental principles and axioms can we all agree on as a starting point, and then build a policy upwards from there? This is a much more sensible way of going about things. But the adversarial nature of the political process makes such a decision-making process impossible. For all of these reasons, but primarily the fundamental incompatibility of the complicated with the complex means that this paradigm, this whole idea of how to do things simply cannot work. And so the first part of this is understanding that. The second part is the idea of unifying large numbers of people under a single umbrella. And I think none of the above has the simplicity and the breadth to be able to do that. And again, I'll just briefly list some of the groups of people I'm talking about. So first of all, the activists. I mean, this is the community that I'm personally coming from. This is what my perspective is all about. And I've been part of the Zeitgeist movement, the Money Free Party, the Venus Project, and more recently, the Game B Seniors. And all of these projects have real contributions to make to a positive vision of the future, but they have slightly different takes on it and tend to they tend not to collaborate. But under the umbrella of none of the above, they can all agree that this doesn't work, right, and this needs to be got out of the way so that a serious discussion can be had about what might work better and how to go about experimenting with ideas and then rolling them out when they're known to work. Another group are all the non-voters. I pointed out that in the UK, some 35% of people do not vote at all. Now, I think it's reasonable to assume that they are simply not motivated to do so. And so that's 35% for none of the above right there. Potentially, if they could be motivated to get out and actually do a none of the above line and tick on their voting card. Another very large group of people, my mother is a perfect example of this. She votes every single election because she believes it is her civic duty to do so, right? But she doesn't like any of the candidates. She's not excited about any of them. And so there's another very large group of voters here potentially who, if they felt that none of the above was a meaningful cast of their vote, could easily be persuaded to do so, I think. And so, there's potentially 70 odd, maybe even 80% of the electorate right there who could be relatively easily persuaded to get on board with none of the above. So in final summing up, if you believe that it's just a question of waiting around for the right people to get into power to, make things right, then you go ahead and continue voting. If you believe, as I do, that it's much, much deeper than that, none of the above really is the only way to go. And remember, this is not just a protest vote. I mean, it is a protest, but it's much more than that. I mean, not only does it take away the mandate of the government, it's also a clear articulation of the fact that we understand that this cannot work, that it is in the way, that we need something different, we need to do things differently. Maybe don't even have a clear idea of how, but in order to figure out how, we need to get this out of the way and have a proper conversation. The having of that conversation, difficult though it will be, some might argue impossible, but nevertheless worth attempting, is also the beginning of the path to healing as a society, coming together, healing the rifts and the divisions that have emerged largely as a consequence of our adversarial political process. And so what is required, I am not this person, unfortunately. What is required is for someone to see this video, think, wow, that's a really good idea, that could really work, and start organizing something around it. Like I said, I am not that person. I don't have either the inclination, the know-how, or the social media presence to be able to do such a thing. But that is my hope. I think this idea has got real legs and real traction. And for those of you that have watched this series, thank you very much for doing so. And as I say, hopefully one of you will pick up the baton and run with it. Thanks again. Bye.
The only thing that's silly is the power of the people's vote. And I think the people should use it to vote for... Say it again! Let me hear it one more time!